Welcome to another live stream of the ACT Chess Association online events, which are currently being held here in Canberra, ACT, while we're in COVID lockdown. My name is Sean Press. I organise these events on behalf of the ACT Chess Association, and this is a summary of our Blitz event that we held last night on Lee Chess. There were 19 players that took part, and it was convincingly won by Fred Litchfield with a very impressive 8.5 out of 9. Only dropped half a point to Clyde Robbins, who was very surprising. Didn't quite finish in the places, but played a number of very good games of chess last night. Second place, Harry Press, way back on 6.5. So there was a 2-point margin for Fred. Wei Li also finished on 6.5. And those three players who I've mentioned, Fred, Harry and Wei Li, often at the top of the table for most of these events. And in fact, the game I'm going to feature today was played between Wei Li and Fred Litchfield early in about midway through the tournament. And it's a really good example of how you play with pieces versus a queen. So around about move 13, Fred sacrifices his queen for some extra wood, as they say, and then uses that to go on and win. So let's just start looking at the games now. So, say Sicilian Dragon is the opening here. So we're going to go through the first few moves rather quickly. Most people know the main line of the Dragon these days. Wei Li played f3, Yugoslav attack, and after knight c6, queen d2. There are a couple of ways of playing this. You can play bishop c4 lines, or you can play queen d2 with the idea of h4, h5, and bishop h6. But they kept following this line here without the bishop going to c4. And there are a couple of choices already in this position. Knight takes d4 is suggested by the computer. Bishop takes d4, queen a5. And this position has been reached about 1 million times without too much drama. Normally king b1 gets played here to get the queen off the c file, but there's also a slightly sneaky trick of playing the knight to d5 in this position. Once the king has gone to b1, and simply after queen takes queen on d2, you don't recapture straight away, but the knight continues its journey down to e7 with check, and then when the king moves out, then you recapture and you've just pocketed a pawn. Instead of queen a5, white can sometimes play black can play bishop e6 here as well, and king b1 is still the right idea, again keeping the king off the c file for the rooks. Fred played d5 in this position. This is not as common, but it is still theory. And I swear it was recommended by Chris Ward in his book on winning with the Dragon at some point in years gone by. And I think even David Smurden has played this line against me in a rapid game once. And Wei Li continued with the thematic king b1. You can be challenged with e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes, pawn takes, and then we're just essentially playing a pawn sacrifice here for black, where black has the advantage of some open lines and a lead in development in return for the pawn. Engines like this position for white because of the material edge. I'm not 100% convinced that it's as clear-cut as that. By the way, the queen on d5 is attacking the rook on h8, but if we take, then bishop f5, threatening mate, threatening the queen, looks like a nice response there. So king went to b1 instead, and then knight takes d4. And after bishop takes here and we exchange in the center, this position's pretty equal. Black should be happy with this position. So white continued with e5, attacking the knight rather than recapturing the knight on d4. Moves like this do take a little bit of calculation, noting that this game was played with 5 minutes each on the clock. It was a blitz game, so there isn't a lot of time for calculation. And the obvious move is to play something like knight takes, pawn takes, and then knight h5 with a slight advantage to white, which I agree with. I think the knight on h5 always seems a bit misplaced in positions like this. Knight f5, so white then recaptured the piece. Instead of the one on d4, captured the one on f6. Bishop takes f6. And this is where the queen sacrifice took place. After knight takes d5, black took on d5 here. But before we do that, let's just have a look at bishop e6. Knight takes f6, e takes f6, bishop f2. And again, white has a slight advantage here. In fact, probably more than a slight advantage because two bishops and a better pawn structure. You've got 3 against 2 on the queen side, while black has 4 against 3 on the king side. The 4 are slightly crippled because of the double pawns. So we take on d5, and this is a definite queen sacrifice, but it is for enough material. So queen takes, and then knight takes e3. And then the knight on e3 is attacking the queen, of course, and is going to pick up the rook. And after queen d2, knight takes d1, queen takes d1, bishop e6. And I've drawn lots of arrows on the line on the board here, just to explain what's going on next, because now we reach this position. Okay, nominally white is up a pawn. Queen worth 9 points, rook worth 5, bishop worth 3, so it's 8 for black, 9 for white, and so a nominal 1 point advantage in this position here. But in return, and I managed to just destroy all my arrows, we have 2 bishops, both pointing in the direction of the king. Okay, we also have 2 rooks, which have these squares to get to, and then they kind of keep attacking down in this direction as well. So the key thing here is that white has the queen, but black has more pieces pointed at the king, and at the same time a lead in development. The other thing to note here is this rook in the corner here is out of play and will take some time to get into play, and this bishop needs to move somewhere to do that, but the options for where the bishop goes can be a little bit tricky. Nonetheless, I'm not saying this is winning for black, and in fact engines still like white because of the material advantage, but black has got all the good things going when you give up pieces for the queen. It's got solid anchor points for the smaller pieces, so the bishops are both protected by pawns, the rooks are working together, and you have a slight initiative because you've got more things to threaten, and more importantly you've also got a lead in development here. So if the queen goes berserk and starts attacking things that are not protected, it's great for white, but if everything's protected and you're ahead in development, you can certainly get away with positions like this. And white continued with bishop b5. Needed to put the bishop somewhere so the rook could come into the game. But this isn't a great square. You could be super passive and play it to e2, or even try and block the d file and playing it to d3. But b5 leaves it a little bit exposed. So the first rook comes out and hits the queen. And again, to show you how difficult these positions are, white starts to go wrong, not in a big way yet, just in small ways, just with some decisions. So queen e2 was better because it mainly does 2 things. Protects the bishop on b5 and allows the rook to come across as necessary. Queen e1 still leaves the rook on h1. Now, it turned out later in the game, white had a plan of pushing the kingside pawns, but I'm not sure whether that plan involved leaving the rook there, or because the rook was there, that was the plan that was chosen. Sometimes, you choose plans, and I guess sometimes plans choose you. So rook to d4, nice good central square for the rook. Pawn to c3, which is a good move, not for white, but for black, because it does weaken the king. And black is hoping for a weakened king position, because those extra pieces are going to do a lot of attacking. Bishop f5 check, for example. King now goes in the corner, and the king on a1 becomes important much later because of tactics. And then the rook retreats, rook to d6. g4, so the plan, of course, to push on the king side is what white is aiming for. Bishop goes back, and then bishop went across to a4. Rook went to a6 to hit the bishop, and then b5 was the first big tactical mistake in this position here. Queen d1 needed to be played, and the reason being that after b5, the bishop can now retreat to b3, and bishop takes b3, queen takes b3 is fine for white. Without the queen on d1, and if the bishop retreated to b3, bishop takes b3 just wins a piece because of the pin on this guy here. So pawn to b4 could be played, then we just swap a few things, and white has a slight advantage, not massive. But after bishop b5, of course, we've just lost a pawn. Rook takes a2, so now material is even, and the king goes back here. But more importantly, the white king is now much more exposed. So black gains a tempo by hitting the bishop, forcing it to move, and the bishop goes to d3. and then the rook comes to d8. So notice that the extra pieces are picking up more squares simply by attacking things that aren't protected. Queen e2 now, and if the queen had already been on e2, we wouldn't have had to play that move way back. Rook to d6, and now the rook is going to swing across to the queen side to help in attacking the king. Next few moves are sort of an exchange. I wouldn't say an exchange of blunders, but the next few moves aren't exact, but not surprising given the time controls. I think both players were probably down to about 90 seconds each, maybe 2 minutes. I was watching this game live, trying to remember exactly how many minutes it took. And then h4. And h4 is the plan to try and open up the king side, create a weakness there to distract black from checkmating the white king. And black played b6. Black could have got away with bishop takes c3 in this position, because after b takes c3, rook check, and then when the king moves to c2, for example, we just simply get rook a2 check. And you go, great, wins the queen, positions back to even. And in fact, white will be 2 pawns. Black will be 2 pawns ahead at the end of it all. King c1, but you can also play rook a1 then. King c2 and then pick up the rook here. And we now have a situation of a queen worth 9 points versus 2 rooks and 2 pawns, which is worth 12 points. So a bigger advantage still. And with the king exposed, there's a greater chance that this queen might fall off the board anyway. Rook b6, king c2, bishop check here, king d2, and rook a2. Again, black could have played this sneaky little move of bishop c4. Again, looking at rook takes b2 as the line, king d3, rook takes e2, king takes e2, and again, 2 pawns to the good in a simplified position. Also, the c3 pawn is going as well, so it's going to be 3 pawns in favour of black in this position. So this is sometimes the issue that you'll find when you're playing with the queen against the minor pieces or the extra pieces for your opponent, is that anything that tactically goes wrong will leave you minus pieces at the end of it all. So rook a2 was played, again with a similar idea. King ran to e3 to protect the b pawn with the queen. Rook b1 was the other thought, but after bishop e6, still threatening to take on b2. Queen e3, bishop takes h4, and white has clawed back. Black, sorry, has clawed back enough material here to certainly justify having pieces for the queen, and the king is still very exposed, and it's looking much better for black. So by this stage, black is winning this position, but as with all sort of blitz games, the clock does help or hinder as it goes, and so black should win, but black just has to make sure that there are no accidents here. Bishop retreated to d5, again looking at capturing on b2. Rook went to b1 now to defend. Bishop took. You could also get away with the, of course, super sneaky, well, not even super sneaky these days. You just get away with bishop takes c3 because of the pin going actually in 2 directions, going that way. Well, not quite 2 directions, but certainly the pin going in that direction is good enough. King went to d4. This is a very brave move. I'm not quite sure. I think white was very short a time here and was just starting to move pieces. Bishop back to b3. Oh no, sorry, I'm pointing in the wrong. Yeah, king d4, bishop back to b3. And we have f4 now. And there are a couple of ways of winning in this position. Rook d6, which was played in the game, is perfectly fine. The other one was rook a4 check, dragging the king across the board with c4, bishop to f6, king to d5, rook to d6. And the reason I'm showing you this line is because a couple of weeks ago when I showed a game by Fred Litchfield where he managed to win by moving his, well, in one of the lines, he didn't actually win the game, but he could have checkmated by moving A and B pawns. Or no, he actually did checkmate, moving his pawns. We have another checkmate very similar, because after check, king goes there, and then we play a6, and we've mated the king. Again, with the A and B pawns, which is quite nice. King e4, rook e6 just wins the queen, going further back. And in fact, rook d6, same effect. King went to e3, rook went to e6, and we're just picking up the queen now. White blocked with the bishop. And there are a number of ways of picking up the bishop, but rook to a4 was probably the easiest one. And after the king went to f3, the rook just took. And white resigned / lost on time in this position. But, for example, if the queen had taken to try and simplify to a rook versus two bishops, which is probably good for black anyway, we actually fall further behind due to this tactic of bishop c2 check here, forking king and rook, and then black is just 2 bishops ahead and will easily win the game, depending on how much time was left, because both players were very short of time at the end. So that was a nice win for Fred, and part of him winning the entire tournament with quite a big score. The key moment here is queen takes d5. By the way, this is theory. Okay, if Fred had discovered it over the board, that's fantastic. But this position has been played before at grandmaster level as well. So it's not an unknown position. It's not an unknown queen sacrifice. But it is still important to know how to play these positions when you've got extra pieces versus the queen. So that came from last night's ACT Blitz event. My name is Sean Press. I organise these on behalf of the ACT Chess Association. If you're interested in playing in these events and you are an ACT Canberra chess player, just come and find the ACTCA Fast Chess Club on Lichess and sign up. When you sign up, make sure you list your real name. I'm getting lots of people who have no connection with ACT Chess and just automatically rejecting their applications. But also some people are signing up and not putting in their proper names, and I've got to reject those ones as well. So tonight we'll have a rapid tournament, 6 rounds, 10 minutes plus 2 seconds on the clock, and I'll be doing a summary of that event tomorrow. So until then, thanks for watching, and I will see you later.